Now it's time for Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of science, faith, and pop culture, and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined with Dr. Steve Willing. Thank you for joining us. So you are a neuroradiologist.
That's right.
You know a lot about the brain and how we think, correct?
Well, I've looked at a few tens of thousands over the years.
Yes. So you've got some familiarity with how the brain works, how we establish our beliefs. We want to talk about that in light of how we make disciples and how what we understand and how people establish their beliefs, how that influences our ability to create disciples. So let's start first there. How well are we doing as Christians in creating disciples of all nations, as we say?
Well, Sandra, not very well. You look at two groups. We look at the young people, and we find from Barna data as well as other studies that young people who are raised in the church are not staying in the church. So large numbers are leaving and joining the ranks of the nuns. Then among adults, the picture doesn't look that much better. Ross Douthat with the New York Times wrote a book called Bad Religion, and then he looks at 4 major heresies that are taking over the American church. Among these are New Age beliefs, the prosperity gospel, theological liberalism, and nationalism. So it's not looking as though the picture is real good.
Right. And what do you think the root issue is?
Well, it all comes down to belief. Young people aren't being taught what to believe. If they are being taught what to believe, they're not being taught why to believe it.
Right.
Even among those who remain among the church, many of them are poorly taught and they're easily led astray by various strange ideas.
So do you think science can play a role in how we establish what we believe?
It's actually been remarkable. Science tells us a lot about beliefs and why people believe the things that they do. Now, we all like to think everything's based on facts, experience, and logic. We always think our beliefs are logical and based on facts. The reality is quite different, and we know that instead that it's thesis. It's tradition, heuristics, emotions, and social influences. And of these, social influences and emotions seem to be the greatest.
And is that bad that they're influencing what we believe?
Not entirely. They can be good or they can be bad. We wouldn't want to make important decisions totally without regard to emotions. Similarly, traditions can be very important. Certainly within the Christian religion, traditions are a mainstay of our doctrines.
Right, right. So you had mentioned also about heuristics. What is that? And how does that look in establishing our beliefs?
Heuristics are mental shortcuts. They're a way we can simply get through the day without having to go through a long process of research and reasoning. An example would be the representativeness heuristic. Like over there, I see a table. Well, before I came into this room, I had never seen that table before in my life. Yet once I saw it, I immediately recognized it for what it was because I have a mental image of a table in my head, and the representativeness heuristic enabled me to realize that that is a table in front of me.
So all of these things are coming into play when we think about our beliefs, but yet we're not all right. So what kind of stands between our beliefs and truth?
There are many obstacles between thinking and attaining the truth. When I mentioned heuristics, well, heuristics are a lazy way of thinking, and sometimes they're used as a substitute for what should require more thoughtful consideration. There are other things that get in our way. Cognitive biases, which have been studied extensively. Misinformation, which is false information arrived at honestly. Disinformation, which is false information delivered dishonestly. And lastly, just the sheer volume of information we have to sort through to really master and understand a subject.
So you mentioned biases. Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Well, there are many, but the best known is a confirmation bias. This is simply where we tend to only consider the evidence in support of our viewpoint, where we only see the evidence that confirms what we already believe and disregard evidence to the contrary.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going around these days. So as we think of what we believe and we think of truth, how can we kind of wade through everything that's coming in front of us, news articles and such, as we think of kind of the intelligence that we get from that, and then wisdom, like even biblical wisdom? How can we differentiate between the two?
Well, smart people can believe really crazy things. That's the difference. Smart people know that they're smart, so they're very confirmed in their own opinions. They have less respect for alternative viewpoints. They're more resistant to changing their minds. So intelligence can actually be an obstacle to wisdom. Wisdom requires, first of all, acknowledging that our understanding and our thinking is imperfect. We need to embrace humility. We need to understand our limits and approach life with an attitude of openness and a willingness to learn. As an example, a genius who sits at home all day watching television as compared to a person of average intelligence who reads, the person of average intelligence at the end of the day is going to be a much wiser individual than the genius who watches TV.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. So as we think of engaging in disciple making or in evangelism, it's so important then to keep in mind the difference between intelligent and wisdom. How would you say our understanding of the two affect our ability to evangelize?
Well, we see that the church is not doing a good job at raising disciples among its own members. We see the importance of apologetics and teaching believers how to think properly and to think correctly. Apologetics is not just for the lost, it's for reaching and discipling the members of the church. We all need to embrace humility and devote ourselves to acquiring wisdom.
Right. I love that, because it's a reminder for us to not just say, hey, we've got the Christian faith that we want to share with others. It's like, no, we have to look at our beliefs, why we believe what we believe, and have a strong foundation before going out and trying to make disciples of all nations, right?
Right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. If you'd like to hear more on this topic, visit reasons.org and search Steve Willing.